The gavel strikes. The courtroom hushes. Beneath the black robes and solemn benches lies a shock far greater than any ordinary crime. When the guardians of justice themselves bend the law, the betrayal cuts deeper. Tonight we pull back the curtain on 10 judges, people sworn to uphold truth, who instead traded integrity for power, money, or darkness. This isn't just corruption. It's the collapse of trust. It's the unraveling of one of the last safe spaces in society. Brace yourself for stories of deception, danger, and disgrace. Thomas J. Maloney, USA, 91, in the heart of Chicago, a city already haunted by whispers of political deals and backroom bargains. One man stood as the symbol of law and order, Judge Thomas J. Maloney. He wore the black robe with confidence, presiding over some of the most dangerous criminal cases Cook County had ever seen. To the public, he was the stern face of justice, a man unafraid to hand down life sentences. But behind closed doors, behind the polished bench and solemn oaths, a darker truth was unfolding. Maloney wasn't just a judge. He was a broker, dealing in verdicts, trading freedom for cash, and deciding justice based not on guilt or innocence, but on who could pay the most. The man who was sworn to uphold the law had become a merchant of corruption. Every verdict was a transaction, every sentence a price tag, and in the deadly world of organized crime that ruled parts of Chicago, his services were invaluable. Between the late 1970s and 1980s, Maloney presided over murder trials, gang disputes, and mob-connected cases, the kind that could decide the future of entire crime families. What the public didn't know was that in several of those cases, defense attorneys had quietly arranged for bribes. Tens of thousands of dollars exchanged hands to make evidence disappear, to soften sentences, to tilt the scales of justice. The man trusted to maintain fairness had become the one selling it off piece by piece. It wasn't a small-time hustle. Maloney's corruption ran deep, through networks of lawyers, fixers, and intermediaries who ensured that money flowed without drawing suspicion. But eventually, the facade began to crack. Federal investigators launched Operation Greylord, one of the most extensive undercover operations targeting judicial corruption in U.S. history. Undercover agents infiltrated courtrooms, wired attorneys, and collected years of evidence. And when the truth finally surfaced, it was explosive. Judge Thomas J. Maloney was exposed as one of the most corrupt figures ever to sit on the bench. The same man who once declared that justice must be blind was caught taking bribes to fix murder trials, even one where the defendant faced the death penalty. The hypocrisy was staggering. He had condemned men to die while secretly pocketing money from others to walk free. In 1991, Maloney was indicted on federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, and bribery. The courtroom that had once obeyed his every word now became his cage. Witness after witness came forward, exposing a pattern of deceit that had tainted Chicago's justice system for more than a decade. Jurors listened to stories of envelopes stuffed with cash, secret meetings, and the chilling realization that some of the city's most violent criminals had bought their way out of punishment. When the verdict came, irony was inescapable. The man who had sentenced hundreds now awaited his own. Thomas J. Maloney was found guilty, a judge turned felon, a guardian of justice, now its greatest betrayer. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, serving 12 before his release. But even behind bars, the damage he left behind couldn't be undone. Families of victims questioned whether their loved ones' killers were truly guilty. Innocent defendants wondered if they had ever stood a chance at all. Maloney's downfall wasn't just a story about one corrupt man. It was a revelation of how power can decay when left unchecked. It showed that when the very person trusted to uphold justice chooses greed, the entire system begins to rot from within. In Chicago, the echo of his gavel still lingers, not as a symbol of justice, but as a reminder of how fragile it truly is. Noel Arrigo and Patrick Vella, Malta, early 2000s. In the early 2000s, Malta was a nation proud of its courts, a small island with a strong belief that justice still meant something. But beneath the marble pillars and national pride, two of the country's highest judges were quietly dismantling that very faith. Chief Justice Noel Arrigo and Judge Patrick Vella were supposed to be the moral backbone of Malta's judiciary. They were men whose words could change lives, whose decisions could restore or destroy hope. Yet behind the formality of their black robes, Greed was quietly pulling the strings. The scandal began with whispers, rumors that something wasn't right about a recent sentence reduction in a major drug trafficking case. The defendant, a well-known trafficker, had miraculously seen his 16-year prison sentence reduced to just 12. For a country that prided itself on strict anti-drug laws, the decision was suspicious. And soon investigators began to dig deeper. What they found shook Malta to its core. Money had exchanged hands. Bribes had been paid. The country's chief justice, the very man meant to symbolize fairness and integrity, had allegedly accepted payment in return for a lighter sentence. Judge Patrick Vella, too, was part of the same web, connected by the same trail of cash and corruption. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a betrayal, raw and undeniable. The men entrusted to defend the law had instead auctioned it off. Investigators uncovered a network of intermediaries, fixers and go-betweens, who facilitated the bribe. Meetings were arranged in secret, promises were whispered in confidence, and banknotes quietly exchanged hands. Each handshake came at the cost of Malta's trust in its justice system. What was most disturbing wasn't just the act of bribery itself, it was the audacity of it. These were not desperate men. They were among the most respected figures in the country, standing at the very top of Malta's judicial hierarchy. When the news broke, it spread through the island like wildfire. The people were stunned. Headlines screamed betrayal. For many, it felt like the ground beneath them had shifted. If even the Chief Justice could be bought, what justice was left for the ordinary citizen? The government had no choice but to act swiftly. Investigations led to criminal charges, and the trials that followed laid bare the rot within the system. Noel Arrigo was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison, later reduced on appeal. Patrick Vella faced his own reckoning, found guilty, stripped of his title, and sentenced to jail as well. Their careers, once symbols of prestige and power, collapsed in disgrace, but the scars they left on Malta's judiciary went far deeper than any sentence could repair. The fallout was immense. The entire nation questioned how long this corruption had been hiding in plain sight. Judges, prosecutors, and citizens alike felt the sting of betrayal. Courtrooms that once commanded respect now carried a shadow. Every verdict that followed, every sentence pronounced was viewed with suspicion. Trust, the foundation of any justice system, had been shattered. For Malta, the Arrigo and Vella scandal became a turning point, a brutal reminder that corruption doesn't need guns or violence to destroy a society. Sometimes it just needs a signature, a robe, and a quiet nod behind closed doors. Syed Shahidur Rahman, Bangladesh 2003-2004. In Bangladesh, the black robe of a judge carries immense respect, a symbol of wisdom, morality, and authority. When Syed Shahidur Rahman was appointed as an additional judge of the High Court Division in 2003, it was seen as the rise of a promising figure in the nation's justice system. His appointment came with high expectations, and for a country long struggling with corruption and political influence, many hoped Rahman's presence would mark a new era of integrity in the judiciary. But within a year, those hopes would crumble. What began as whispers of misconduct would explode into one of the most shocking judicial scandals in Bangladesh's history. Almost immediately after Rahman took the bench, allegations began to surface. Allegations that he was accepting bribes in exchange for granting bail, manipulating case outcomes and favoring certain parties in exchange for money. These were not minor accusations. They went straight to the core of judicial ethics. Every decision a judge makes can change a life, and if those decisions are for sale, justice itself becomes meaningless. Behind his polished demeanor and calm courtroom presence, Rahman was accused of turning his position into a business. Lawyers and court staff began to talk. Stories emerged of intermediaries collecting money on his behalf, of meetings arranged in secrecy, of envelopes exchanged behind closed doors. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. When one particular case involving alleged bribe money came to light, it was enough to set the wheels of investigation in motion. The Supreme Judicial Council, a rare and powerful oversight body, was called to examine the claims. What they found left the nation stunned. The inquiry uncovered evidence suggesting that Rahman had indeed accepted bribes and had abused his position for personal gain. His actions weren't just unethical, they were criminal. Bangladesh's constitution grants judges immense independence, But with that independence comes a sacred duty to remain above corruption. Rahman had shattered that duty. For the first time in the country's history, the Supreme Judicial Council recommended that a sitting High Court judge be removed from office for corruption. It was an unprecedented moment, a painful but necessary one. In April 2004, President Iyajuddin Ahmed approved the recommendation, officially dismissing Syed Shahidur Rahman from his post. The decision sent shockwaves across the nation. No judge in the history of Bangladesh had ever been removed like this. The public reaction was one of disbelief mixed with anger. For many, Rahman's downfall symbolized not just one man's greed, but the rot that can infect even the highest pillars of justice. The incident tore open a wound that Bangladesh had long tried to ignore: the quiet, creeping influence of money in its legal system. If a high court judge could be bribed, how far did the corruption reach? How many innocent people had been denied justice because someone else could afford to buy it? What made Rahman's case even more haunting was the contrast between expectation and reality. Here was a man entrusted with the sacred power to interpret the law, to free the innocent, to punish the guilty, and yet he chose to trade that power for personal profit. His removal marked a rare victory for accountability, but it also exposed a terrifying truth. Corruption wasn't limited to politicians or police officers. It had reached the very top of the judicial hierarchy. The fall of Syed Shahidur Rahman became a warning to every judge who might be tempted to cross the same line. His name became synonymous with disgrace, a constant reminder that the law, when betrayed from within, loses not just its authority, but its soul. Kim Chaney, USA, Alabama, 2017. In the quiet courthouses of Alabama, Judge Kim Chaney was a familiar name, a man whose career spanned decades, marked by confidence, influence, and a reputation for decisive rulings. To many, he was the embodiment of Southern authority, a stern, commanding figure who spoke with the weight of the law. But beneath the calm surface of his courtroom, Chaney was orchestrating something far more personal, a scheme not built on justice, but on self-interest. It wasn't a crime of violence or greed for fortune. It was something more insidious, a corruption born from the misuse of trust and power. The story broke in 2017, when investigators began to uncover an unsettling pattern in Judge Chaney's courtroom records. Over the course of several years, Chaney had quietly appointed his own son, a private attorney, to represent hundreds of indigent defendants, individuals too poor to afford their own lawyers. On paper, it seemed harmless, even generous, a father helping his son gain experience in the legal field. But beneath that veneer of mentorship lay a deeper truth. Those appointments weren't random. They were deliberate, repeated, and financially rewarding. In Alabama, court-appointed attorneys are paid by the state, taxpayers' money meant to ensure that even the poorest citizens receive a fair trial. Chaney's son, thanks to these repeated appointments, had earned over $100,000 in public funds. The problem wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal of the judicial oath. A judge is supposed to be impartial, to serve the public, not his own family. Chaney had turned his bench into a tool for nepotism, turning justice into a family business. When the news surfaced, it hit the Alabama judiciary like a thunderclap. The idea that a sitting judge, someone entrusted with upholding the law, had used his authority to enrich his son was both embarrassing and enraging. The state's Judicial Inquiry Commission launched a full investigation, uncovering not just the appointments themselves, but the blatant disregard for conflict of interest ethics that underpinned them. Chaney had not disclosed his familial relationship in many of these cases. The defendants, the people whose futures were being decided in his courtroom, had no idea that their court-appointed lawyer was the judge's own child. To many observers, it wasn't just an ethical violation, it was a mockery of the justice system. It revealed how easily personal ties could warp professional duty, how a system designed to protect the powerless could be exploited by those in power. Chaney's defenders argued that no direct harm was done, that his son was qualified and performed his duties. But the damage wasn't in performance, and it was in perception. The moment fairness is replaced with favoritism, justice loses its integrity. The case ignited a wave of public anger and embarrassment for Alabama's legal community. Critics called for stronger oversight, for clearer rules preventing judges from steering appointments toward relatives. Cheney's conduct became part of a larger pattern exposed by national investigations into judicial misconduct, revealing how, across the country, judges were bending rules, hiding conflicts, and quietly abusing their positions. For Judge Kim Cheney, the story became more than just a scandal. It was a mirror held up to the justice system itself. It forced the uncomfortable question: what happens when the people trusted to protect fairness decide to serve themselves instead? His courtroom, once a symbol of authority, became a cautionary tale of how easily ethics can be twisted when family, power, and money intersect behind the gavel. Larisa Golnik, Ukraine, 2015 ongoing. In the turbulent political landscape of Ukraine, where corruption has long haunted the halls of power, one judge refused to stay silent. Her name was Larisa Golnik, a woman whose courage would make her both a hero and a target. In a justice system often accused of bending to influence, she chose a path almost no one dared to take. She exposed corruption from within. But her decision would come at a price that would nearly cost her life. In 2015, Judge Larisa Golnik served in the Poltava City Court. When a case involving Poltava's mayor, Oleksandr Mamai, landed on her desk, she thought it was routine, another case of alleged abuse of office. But soon subtle signs of pressure began to emerge. Officials hinted that she should find a way to dismiss the case. Then came the bribe offers, quiet coded conversations suggesting that if she cooperated, her career would flourish, her path would be smooth. If not, she might face consequences. For most judges, this was the unspoken rule of survival, but Golnik refused to play along. Instead of giving in, she did something unprecedented. She set up a hidden camera in her office. And when the bribe attempt came, she recorded it. The footage, later made public, showed intermediaries close to the mayor offering her rewards to manipulate the case. The video sent shockwaves through Ukraine. A sitting judge had not only resisted corruption, but had exposed it with undeniable evidence. For a brief moment, she became a national symbol of integrity, the kind of hero the country desperately needed. But the celebration didn't last. The system she had exposed began to turn against her. Her colleagues ostracized her. Promotions disappeared. Official complaints against her piled up. The same judiciary that should have protected her began quietly punishing her. And then one night in 2017, the warnings became real. As she walked home, two masked men attacked her, beating her brutally. She was left bleeding in the street, a message written in violence. The attackers were never clearly identified, but the motive was obvious. She had dared to humiliate those in power. Even after the assault, Golnik refused to be silenced. She returned to work, still facing harassment, still documenting the corruption around her. Her office became a fortress of truth inside a courthouse drowning in secrecy. She posted her findings online, spoke to journalists, and openly criticized the political and judicial elite. Each statement she made chipped away at her safety but strengthened her resolve. In Ukraine, corruption had always been a faceless villain, whispered about, joked about, tolerated. But through Golnik's defiance, it suddenly had a name, a face, and a victim. Her bravery revealed not just individual wrongdoing, but an entire culture of intimidation and silence that infected the justice system from top to bottom. Her story became a warning and a rallying cry. While others hid behind the excuse of survival, Golnik proved that integrity could still exist, even in a system designed to crush it. She stood alone, facing the same darkness most chose to ignore. And though her fight continues, one thing remains certain. In a world where corruption thrives in silence, Larisa Golnik chose to make noise. Anita Kelly, USA, Alabama, 2018. In Alabama, a place where justice often walks a fine line between tradition and reform, Judge Anita Kelly was once seen as a figure of promise. She sat on the family court bench, a position that demanded not just intellect but compassion, patience, and above all, urgency. The people who came before her were not hardened criminals or corporate giants. They were children, parents, and families in crisis, those whose lives hung on the edge of her decisions. But what began as quiet delays soon unraveled into something much darker, a pattern of neglect that revealed a system's deep failure and a judge's slow descent into apathy and power abuse. Between 2013 and 2018, whispers began to spread through the Montgomery County Courthouse. Cases weren't being resolved. Families waited months, sometimes years, for rulings that should have taken days. Children caught in custody battles remained in limbo. Lives were frozen by inaction. For a while, no one wanted to believe it. The judicial process can be slow, after all. But as the backlog grew, the stories became too painful to ignore. Parents begged for closure. Social workers pleaded for movement. Still in nothing. The files sat untouched, collecting dust on her desk while families fell apart outside her courtroom doors. When the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission finally investigated, the truth was staggering. Judge Kelly had left cases unresolved for up to 5 years. Families came to court again and again only to leave empty-handed. In one report, children who needed immediate protection were left vulnerable because rulings never came. The investigation uncovered a chilling pattern, not just inefficiency but indifference. In the courtroom where time meant everything, she had allowed justice to stand still. For many, the scandal was a reminder that corruption isn't always about money or bribes. Sometimes it's about the quiet decay of duty, the kind that destroys lives not through greed but through neglect. Kelly had violated one of the most sacred principles of the judiciary, the duty to serve the vulnerable with fairness and urgency. Her failure didn't just delay justice, it denied it. In 2018, the Alabama Court of the Judiciary handed down its decision. Anita Kelly was suspended without pay for 90 days, a punishment many considered light compared to the harm she caused. But the sentence wasn't what broke public trust. It was the realization that someone with such immense responsibility could simply look away while others suffered. Parents who once entered her courtroom with hope left it with heartbreak. Some children aged out of foster care before their cases were ever resolved. The victims of her inaction didn't appear in headlines. Their pain didn't come with sensational details or dramatic revelations. It was quieter than that. It was the pain of waiting, the pain of uncertainty, the pain of being forgotten by the very system designed to protect them. When her suspension was announced, Alabama's judiciary faced an uncomfortable reflection. How many other judges were sitting behind their benches letting time and neglect become their tools of injustice? How many families were still waiting, unheard and unseen? Anita Kelly's case was more than a disciplinary story. It was an indictment of complacency. Her courtroom, once a place meant to deliver closure, became a chamber of silence. A place where justice didn't die with a bang, but faded slowly with every passing day. Marvin Wiggins, USA, Alabama, 2009 present. Deep in the small towns of Alabama, the courthouse is more than a building. It's a stage where justice is supposed to stand tall, unshaken by bias or influence. For years, Judge Marvin Wiggins held that stage with confidence and authority. Appointed in Alabama's 4th Judicial Circuit, Wiggins was known for his commanding presence and his connection to the community. But behind the firm voice and calm demeanor, his courtroom would become a place of controversy, a place where justice bent under his will and power became a weapon instead of a duty. Marvin Wiggins' name first entered the national spotlight in 2009 when he was reprimanded by the Alabama Court of the Judiciary for ethical violations. It wasn't his first brush with scrutiny, and it wouldn't be his last. The charges against him painted a troubling picture. He had used his influence to interfere in cases where he had personal or family interests, failing to recuse himself even when the law required it. It was a direct violation of the fundamental rule that no judge should ever preside over matters that touch their personal life. But Wiggins didn't step back. He leaned in. Over time, reports piled up. There were allegations of favoritism, unprofessional behavior, and questionable sentencing practices. But the most shocking moment came years later in 2015, when his name made headlines across the country, not for corruption in the financial sense, but for a shocking abuse of authority in open court. During a session in Perry County, Judge Wiggins addressed a room full of people who owed court fines and fees. Standing before them, he gave a choice that stunned the nation. "If you don't have the money," he said, "go out and give blood and bring me back a receipt." The message was clear. Donate your blood or go to jail. The statement sent ripples through the judicial world. Civil rights groups condemned him immediately. Legal experts called it barbaric, a chilling echo of a time when the poor were punished simply for being poor. Wiggins later claimed it was a misunderstanding, that he was trying to help people avoid jail time. But for those in that courtroom, it didn't feel like help. It felt like coercion. It felt like humiliation disguised as mercy. Even after the blood drive scandal faded from headlines, Wiggins continued to face disciplinary actions and public criticism. The Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission cited him multiple times for behavior that undermined the integrity of the bench. Yet somehow he remained in power, a living reminder of how difficult it can be to hold judges accountable in systems built to protect them. In small towns across the state, people still whisper about Judge Wiggins and about his temper, about his decisions, about how his courtroom never felt like a place where everyone was equal. Some see him as a man who let power go to his head, others as a symptom of a larger sickness within the judicial system, where oversight is weak and arrogance thrives. For the people who once stood before him, those who paid their fines, gave their blood or faced his judgment, the memory is unforgettable. The bench that was supposed to symbolize fairness became a throne of fear and control. Marvin Wiggins' courtroom became a chilling example of what happens when justice forgets humility, when the law becomes a performance rather than a promise. Judge Tarsum Mangala, India, 2024 and early 2024. India's legal community was rocked by a revelation that sent shockwaves through the nation's judiciary. In the city of Faridkot, Punjab, a family court principal judge named Tarsum Mangala, a man entrusted with resolving the most delicate disputes of love, trust, and family, was suddenly suspended. The news spread quickly. Allegations of large-scale corruption had surfaced against him, and what began as a quiet internal inquiry had erupted into a full-blown scandal that cast another dark shadow over India's already fragile judicial reputation. For years, Judge Mangala presided over family disputes, divorce cases, and child custody hearings. Cases that often demanded compassion, patience, and integrity. People entered his courtroom at their most vulnerable, seeking fairness from someone sworn to be impartial. But behind the solemn bench and the polished language of justice, investigators claimed something sinister was happening. Reports suggested that Mangala was taking bribes to influence outcomes, demanding money to fast-track cases, to grant favorable rulings, or to pressure one side into submission. Justice in his courtroom allegedly had a price tag. It started as whispers, lawyers complaining about unofficial payments needed to ensure their clients received a fair hearing. At first, no one dared to speak openly. In India's courtrooms, power is often insulated by silence, but as the pattern grew too obvious to ignore, complaints reached higher authorities. The Punjab and Haryana High Court took notice and quietly began investigating. What they uncovered painted a chilling picture. Allegations of financial misconduct, misuse of position, and a deep network of influence that extended beyond a single courtroom. The investigation moved fast. Within weeks, Judge Tarsum Mangala was suspended pending inquiry, a rare and serious action that signaled the gravity of the accusations. While the exact amounts involved were not immediately disclosed, sources suggested that the corruption stretched beyond isolated incidents. It was systematic, deliberate, and deeply embedded in his courtroom's daily operation. For those who had trusted him, it felt like betrayal. For those who had feared him, it felt like vindication. The scandal didn't just taint one man. It reignited a nationwide debate about judicial accountability in India. How many other judges were abusing their authority behind the shield of their robes? How many lives had been silently destroyed by verdicts bought and sold in secret? For the public, the news wasn't just shocking. It was exhausting. Another name, another scandal, another judge exposed. What made the case of Judge Tarsum Mangala particularly unsettling was its setting, the family court. These are not criminal trials filled with hardened offenders. These are cases where ordinary people come seeking closure, custody, or peace after heartbreak. To exploit those moments for personal gain isn't just corruption, it's cruelty. It means turning pain into profit. As the inquiry continued, the High Court emphasized that his suspension was only the beginning, that every piece of evidence would be examined, every bribe traced, every injustice revisited. But for the people of Faridkot, the damage was already done. Faith in the court system, in the very idea that justice could be fair, had been shaken once again. The image of Judge Tarsum Mangala sitting behind the bench, pretending to deliver fairness while allegedly profiting from despair, became a symbol of something larger. It reflected a system struggling to clean itself, a justice machine clogged by greed and protected by silence. S.N. Shukla, India, 2023. In India's vast and complex judicial system, few positions carry as much weight as that of a high court judge. Their words can change destinies, rewrite laws, and restore faith in a system constantly accused of corruption. Justice S.N. Shukla of the Allahabad High Court once held that power. He wore the robe of authority with confidence, presiding over cases that shaped lives and futures. But in 2023, his name would become synonymous not with justice, but with greed, exposed in one of India's most unsettling judicial scandals in recent memory. The whispers began long before the headlines. There were rumors of unusual wealth, of connections that stretched far beyond the courtroom. Properties, assets, and bank accounts, all seemingly disproportionate to a judge's official salary. For a while, these rumors were just that, background noise in a country where power and privilege often walk hand in hand. But when the Central Bureau of Investigation, India's top anti-corruption agency, stepped in, the truth began to surface, and it was worse than anyone imagined. Investigators found that between 2014 and 2019, Justice Shukla had allegedly accumulated assets vastly exceeding his known income. Multiple properties across states, luxury items, and unexplained financial transactions painted a picture of corruption hiding in plain sight. This wasn't the first time his name had surfaced in controversy either. Years earlier, Shukla had already been accused of granting favorable orders to private medical colleges in exchange for favors, a scandal that had rocked the judiciary and led to his judicial work being withdrawn. Yet somehow, despite the uproar, he had remained untouched for years, shielded by the very system he had betrayed. By 2023, the walls finally began to close in. The CBI registered a fresh case against him under charges of disproportionate assets, a phrase that has become all too common in India's corridors of power. The allegations were staggering: properties worth crores of rupees, financial trails leading to multiple accounts, and lifestyle expenses far beyond his declared earnings. It was a portrait of quiet corruption, one built not through violent crime, but through years of calculated deceit. What made Justice Shukla's case particularly damning was his previous history. In 2018, an in-house judicial panel had found him guilty of misconduct in the medical college case, recommending his removal from office. Yet no action was taken. Political hesitations and bureaucratic delays allowed him to continue living freely, his status as a former judge protecting him like armor. For the public, it was infuriating, a clear reminder that even when corruption is exposed, accountability often stops at the doors of power. The renewed investigation in 2023 reopened old wounds. How many judgments had been influenced by bribes? How many innocent lives were ruined by verdicts that were for sale? When the very person meant to guard the law becomes its violator, the damage cuts deeper than any single crime. It infects belief itself, belief that justice can still be fair, that the system still works. Justice S.N. Shukla's story is more than just another case of corruption. It is the anatomy of arrogance, the slow decay of conscience that comes when power is unchecked for too long. In the quiet luxury of his home, amid the wealth that shouldn't have existed, lay the evidence of how one man's greed could stain an entire institution. In India, where millions still look to the courts as the final refuge of fairness, his fall became a mirror reflecting a painful truth: that sometimes the rot doesn't start at the bottom. It starts at the top. Transparency International, Global Risk Summary, Global, Ongoing. Across continents, beneath the symbols of justice and the echoing halls of courtrooms, a quiet and dangerous corruption festers, one that knows no borders. From Asia to Africa, Europe to the Americas, judges, the very custodians of truth, have been caught manipulating verdicts, selling judgments, and protecting the powerful. Transparency International, the global anti-corruption watchdog, has spent years uncovering what many nations refuse to admit. Judicial corruption is not an anomaly. It's a global epidemic. When people think of corruption, they picture politicians or police officers. But the judiciary, the system designed to keep all others in check, is the most dangerous place for it to hide. According to Transparency International's ongoing global studies, judicial corruption takes many forms: bribery, political interference, favoritism, and even the quiet exchange of influence between judges, lawyers, and business elites. The results are devastating. Innocent lives ruined, the guilty walking free, and societies losing faith in the one institution meant to protect them. In some nations, judges openly accept facilitation payments to speed up trials. In others, verdicts are dictated by political figures in backrooms before hearings even begin. There are stories of judges who owe their positions to bribes, promotions traded like currency, and court orders that can be bought for the right price. Transparency International's research reveals a chilling truth. In countries where corruption runs deep, people often fear the courts as much as the criminals. In sub-Saharan Africa, entire judicial systems are reported to have been captured by political interests, where opposing the government in court can mean the end of a career, or worse. In parts of Latin America, drug cartels have infiltrated the courts, ensuring protection through money or threats. Even in Western nations, where the judiciary is often seen as untouchable, subtle forms of influence, corporate pressure, lobbying, and favoritism shape decisions more than the law itself. The most haunting element isn't how much corruption exists, it's how rarely it's punished. Judges sit above the system they are meant to answer to, protected by legal immunity, complex hierarchies, and fear. In many countries, disciplinary mechanisms are internal, handled by the same bodies that protect their own. Investigations stall, evidence vanishes, and the accused quietly retire with pensions instead of prison sentences. Transparency. International's findings expose a cycle of impunity that erodes trust in democracy itself. When citizens no longer believe the courts are fair, they stop seeking justice. When the powerful can buy verdicts, the rule of law collapses into illusion. The gavel, once a symbol of equality, becomes an instrument of control, wielded by those who view justice as a commodity. Across the globe, activists, journalists, and reformers are still fighting to pull back the curtain. They gather evidence, publish reports, and risk their safety to expose judges who betray their oaths. And every new revelation, every leaked document, every hidden bribe uncovered, paints the same picture: a world where justice is being sold in pieces, country by country, courtroom by courtroom. Transparency. International's work stands as both a warning and a mirror. The corruption they uncover isn't confined to any one place. It's a reflection of what happens when power becomes too comfortable, when accountability fades, and when the law ceases to serve the people it was built to protect.